Hi everyone, thank you for joining us for another episode of UNESCO Talks. Today's guest is Hartmut Rosa, is a celebrated social scientist and sociologist. In his book, The Uncontrollability of the World, he writes how technological change is happening at a pace that is so quick we're struggling to adapt to it. But he also has some answers. Hartmut, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Could you go through your concepts of acceleration and also resonance?
Yeah, I really started by realizing that there seems to be something wrong with the way human beings nowadays in the modern world or in the late modern world experience time. The interesting thing is that we permanently save time with faster technologies, faster transport and so on. But we never seem to have it, right? It's very strange that the more time we save, the less we seem to have, right? So I realized that technology speeds up, but it creates a problem for us. Instead of giving us more time, it seems to give us less time. So we speed up our speed of life or pace of life. But also it seems to be connected to the fact that we change so fastly, right? Our technologies change and interactions change, patterns of association, forms of knowledge and so on. So I realized that if you want to understand modern society, you have also to look to the temporal structures. Modernization, I don't mean it in a normative sense, like it's the good thing, right? I'm just describing what's happening. It means speeding up the world, literally setting it in motion at a faster and faster pace. So I was really interested in this.
So we have a technological change that is happening at an increasing speed, it seems. But there have been other periods in history where we had societies living through big changes. Is there a difference?
Yeah, I mean, in the first place, I wouldn't say it's totally new in the 21st century, right? I mean, around 1900, 1920, when they came up with the, with the street cars and with the cars, by the way, and with the telephone or telegraphic system and radio, it was a period of acceleration too. So my idea is that this logic of acceleration has really changed its form in the 18th, since the 18th century. Since then, there are waves and waves of acceleration. But before that, as you say, we had turbulent times of change, right, where things change very quickly, where you even lose track of reality, right? But there is a huge difference, because when I speak of social acceleration, I do not just mean turbulent times, right? Fast or periods of fast change, but the fact that you have a social fabric, a very solid social fabric, like the modern capitalist world order is. It's surprisingly solid because it's been around for 200 years or more than that, right? And within this logic, to sustain the logic, you have to accelerate, to grow and to innovate. And that's totally new in history, right? Of course, we had periods of social breakdown, for example, of revolution or change, right? But then a new order is established. And normally cultures of all forms try to stabilize this order, to keep it as it is. While in our modern society, we have to permanently accelerate, grow and innovate technologically, socially, culturally, with fashion waves and so on, just to maintain the institutional structure as it is. I call this endogenous acceleration, right? It's not speeding up because of some changes in the environment. We are forced to speed up, grow, accelerate, innovate, just to keep order as it is, and that's new in history.
And your conception of resonance, how did this come about, and how can it help us deal with this social acceleration?
Yeah, I mean, when I did this acceleration book, after I published it, a lot of people thought, oh, Hartmut Rosa is the guru of deceleration, just slow down, right? And I thought, well, that's too easy, because number one, we cannot simply leave the economic order and the other orders as they are and slow down, because then our institutions would break down. But also, slowness is not an end in itself. I don't like a slow fire engine, right? Or a slow internet connection. They are not good in themselves. So I wrote a small book which said, the problem of acceleration is if it creates alienation, if we lose the capacity to really appropriate the world and the people we interact with, right, the things we work on, contact with nature, if we lose that because we are too fast, right? So I said alienation is the problem, right? Acceleration is something that might lead to alienation, but not always, right? So I asked myself, what's the opposite of alienation? When do we have a non-alienated form of life? Because it's not enough in philosophy to criticize the existing order, right? If you just only criticize, you will never change the world, right? I think we need to find a conception of what could it mean to be non-alienated, to lead a good life. And this is how I came to resonance, right? We are non-alienated from life when we are capable of entering into resonance with each other, right? That means we are not just talking, exchanging information or insulting, right? But we are really touching each other in what we say, for example, right? And having a kind of transformative effect. And I realized that these forms of relationship or resonance with the world, right, is not just in dialogue. We can resonate with the tools we work with, right, with the nature we operate in, or with the music we play, with philosophy, for example, right? You read some thoughts, and in school sometimes you have to know what Kant says or what Aristotle says, and then you have to reproduce it. That's not appropriation in the true sense, right? It is when you start to think a bit like Kant, if you're capable of seeing the world through Aristotle or Marx's eyes also, right? So resonance for me is the primal, the most important mode of human being in the world. Right, resonance, I would say, is the opposite of alienation, and it's a limit to the acceleration, at least to acceleration, good for us.
So, is it possible that technology has changed? We now have social media. Is this a way that we can achieve another form of resonance, of connection with people?
I mean, look, resonance for me is a form of relationship, right? That's what it's about. I mean, alienation is a distortion in our relationship to the world, and resonance, in my view, is a positive form of relating to the world. And it has 4 elements. Something is touching me, something is speaking to me, it moves me from the inside, you could say, right? The second element is I answer it, I experience self-efficacy. I am capable of reaching out to you or to the music I hear or the landscape or the animal I interact with. The third is, in this process, I'm transformed. I don't stay the same, right? And the fourth is that I cannot fabricate, I cannot engineer this form of resonance. Now, when we interact with social media, we somehow look for exactly this form of relationship, right? For example, I have a smartphone in my pocket, and if it vibrates, so the world is calling me. That seems to be number one of resonance. Something is speaking to me, something is calling to me, right? So I take it out, right? And then I answer. I can post it, or I can like it, or I can comment on it, right? So that's self-efficacy. I react to it, and of course I hope it will transform me, and in this process I'm participating in the world, right? But then you realize when we're done, so to speak, we are not full of energy, we don't feel reconnected. It somehow seems to rather isolate us from the world. That's what a lot of people say, even young people say, right? So somehow social media I would really say they simulate resonance, right? Participation, belonging, right? Self-efficacy. But something seems to be not quite satisfactory, right? It kind of puts us in this logic of quantitative acceleration and optimization itself, right? So, and I think we are here in a huge cultural experiment. Nobody quite knows what the result of this will be. But from the experience of human beings, it seems to be that it's not the real resonance we're looking for.
So you've said in previous interviews that we can achieve resonance by really engaging in things that move us at some level. What are examples of this?
I mean, one example is dialogue, right? And whenever you speak to a person, you know that there are kind of 2 modes. Very often you have a feeling either I'm not really interested in what you're saying, but I have to, right? Or sometimes you feel, but somehow I don't understand your point, right? I feel like the talk's not going well, or the dialogue. But sometimes you really feel, you can actually see it in the eyes beam up, right? And even the body might change because now it's getting really interesting, right? So that's one example, right? But people feel resonance in many different ways. I mean, music, for example, is an extremely powerful source, right? Which it can move people to tears, right? When you listen to your music, and then all of a sudden you feel it's really like you're shaken from the inside, right? This is this grip, and actually even with music, it's not just passive, right? You listen, which means your whole experience, your whole being is kind of moving outward, right? Listening, connecting to what's coming at you. When you're in a depression, right, you might play your favorite song and you realize it's wonderful, but it doesn't touch you, right? Or maybe it touches you, but you're not capable of reacting to it, right? So music is one form, but there are many forms. People have this experience also in work. I think this is why working is really important for us as human beings, because when you work on something, right, you have this double experience too. it's meaningful to you. This is why you're doing it, hopefully, right? Maybe you're only paid, but even if you're just doing a labor, right, paid work, even there people start to kind of feel a relationship of resonance. They very often they like what they do and they feel self-efficacy. They change the world, which changes themselves. That's what Karl Marx actually has already described, right? So we find resonance in many ways, and philosophy is also one, right? Where people really feel they read something and sometimes it's resonance is not always positive in at least not at first sight, right? You read an idea. It happened to me once when I read a text by Michel Foucault. I really felt like I'm losing my ground, right? It's taken away what I thought is my identity and my stability. But then you feel it's speaking to you and you start thinking of it, working with it, right? So philosophy can be a form of resonance.
Speaking of philosophy, at a talk you gave at UNESCO for World Philosophy Day, you introduced this concept of social energy. Can you talk about it and say how it relates to your other ideas about resonance?
Yeah, I was kind of pushed towards the concept of social energy by both my books I had written before, because I realized this logic of social energy, right? It's driven by physical energies, fossil energies, but also nuclear and so on, what we take from nature, right? But it requires psychic energy, because the machines and institutions don't accelerate, innovate and grow. It's us, the human beings, who have to come up with, who have to accelerate. Year by year you have to run faster, and me too, right? And that's not just that's of course not physical running, right? It's kind of it needs psychic energy, and I realized I did not have a good concept of psychic energy, right? Even the psychologists, I thought psychologists must have it, but after Freud with his libido, right, drives, which no one talks about anymore, right? We don't really have a good concept of this, but I realized that the energy we need and the energy we seem to be lacking is not just individual. I realized it's a kind of misconception to think of energy as something I have as an individual. We speak like that sometimes. I would say I have energy, right? But then you realize it's not just my energy which I transfer to you or the other way around, but whether, for example, a dialogue gets high energetic, right, seems to be a question of interaction, right? Because sometimes, I think everyone knows this, sometimes after work, after a long day, you might get home and watch TV and think, you're so tired, I hardly make it to bed, right? And then some friends come along and say, oh, won't you join us maybe for a drink in the bar or even to play soccer a bit, right? And then you say, oh, okay, I come along. And then you play soccer, and when you come home, you got more energy than before, right? So obviously it's not just that you invest energy and then you somehow have to recreate it. And the same is true for social movements and for societies. It seems, my take was that we are kind of running out of energy individually and collectively, right? Politically, look at the world. We have environmental problems, we have war, right? We have the plague, so to speak, coming back, the epidemics, but we have injustice and inequality of incredible extent, and we seem totally incapable of doing anything, right? Even though we are so successful as societies, right, as the world, right? It seems like we lack energy of really moving things forward, of changing anything. We just run in the same track. And individually, a lot of people, the burnout rates are increasing all the time. And the interesting question for me was, what is lacking if I'm in a burnout? Because I might not be able to move up the stairs, right? Even though I have enough bodily energy, calories in my body. So I think we have to rethink this concept of energy, not as something I have or you have, and we invest. So I think so far we use a kind of input-output model. I have to put in energy and then I get something. But social energy is rather circulating. We participate in it, right? It's created in interaction. And we do not have a concept of this in modern sociology and Western philosophy.
So in Western society, maybe we don't have a good conception of social energy, but have other cultures dealt with this in different ways or come up with a different way of using this in building society?
Well, absolutely. This is actually my hope to kind of, you could say, globalize my social philosophy, because I think it's exactly as you say. In Western philosophy and sociology, we either have concepts of physical energy, of course, right, physics and chemistry and so on. or maybe some sense of psychic energy, but it's very, very shaky there. Or it becomes totally esoteric. There's a lot of esoteric ideas about energy sources, which I cannot really use as a sociologist, right? But then when I turn to other cultures, actually I can start with the Greeks if I want, and they have conceptions of energeia, ergon, pneuma, right? And dynamis is a Greek concept too. But it's fantastic to look, for example, to Chinese philosophy with Tao or Qi, right, as something, and it's exactly as participating in something. In India, of course, you find great concepts of energy with prana, for example, or even kundalini as a kind of energy moving in people. And even if you turn to Africa, if you read Achille Mbembe or Suleiman Bashir Diagne, right, they say actually that African philosophies, of course, in the different sorts, Senegal, Cameroon, wherever you look, they work with a sense of vital energies, right, that is running not just through living beings, maybe even through stones and trees and oceans and the sun and the moon and the planets, and it's a kind of connection created by energy, right? And I really think this helps us go beyond this input, output, subject, object, active, passive conceptions we have in Western societies, right? Here we are so much, I think we also have created, of course, a kind of a property-focused sense of being in the world. I have things and I use things, right? And I want to replace this. I think we need to replace it by participating in an order, you could say, right? Or belonging to a system, right? And that does not just mean I have to follow, right, to submit to a given order, but I participated in it, right? So this is, I talk about medio passivity, where I'm active and passive at the same time. I'm giving and taking, but giving and taking is one action. And if you want to think along those lines, you don't find it in European thinking. You have to go to other forms, also indigenous forms of traditional forms of thought in Latin America help a lot in this respect.
So really going back to older values and cultures than capitalism and seeing what we can learn from them.
Absolutely, because it's very obvious that, I mean, I would say, I mean, we have to be, I think the fact is that modern science and modern economy have been successful, and that's quite good, right? But right now we have really reached a dead end, right? Ecologically, politically, culturally. So we definitely have to go back or go beyond the modern capitalist order. That seems to be absolutely sure for me.
Hartmut Rosa, it was a great pleasure to talk to you. Very interesting. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for joining, and please be sure to tune in to the next session of UNESCO Talks.